Hey everyone, so we are going to be going over chapter 4 of recorded text today, and I know there was a lot of reading this week for this for our module, but I wanted to kind of condense these first couple of theory-driven chapters, and that way we can focus on more topics later on in the semester. So yeah, a lot of reading. Hopefully it wasn't all completely new to you. I think some of you are probably familiar with some of these theoretical orientations, at least at a surface level. If you've had Psych 101, you've heard of psychoanalysis and Adlerian theory. So hopefully it was a bit of a review. If not, and it was all new to you, fantastic, equally as good. So I'm going to do a short little review of psychoanalysis. And then I'll have another little video posted in the second section of the module that is related to Adlerian theory, okay? So you will find within this module, hopefully everybody was able to view my last video and how to access some of the video content that I'm going to be posting for you all. I've got some links again within the chapter 4 content and chapter 5 content sub-content folders of this module, videos for you to watch as well. Within the chapter 4 content area, the video that you're going to be watching this week, it is relatively lengthy. The first part of it is a number of psychoanalysts talking amongst themselves about the history of psychoanalysis and Freud and how it's evolved over time, which is what I hope to be really putting the focus on with this chapter, is what psychoanalysis looks like today, because it's much different than what it was when Freud initially kind of developed psychoanalysis. So the full version is almost 2 hours long. While I would love for you all to watch that, I understand time is limited, and that's a long time to keep attention. So if you fast forward through it and get to the actual session part, where the therapist, I completely forget her name, but the client's name is Annie. So I do want you to watch the actual therapy session. It begins around the 47-minute mark and ends about the hour 30 point. So it is shorter. Take some notes on it. So as far as the PowerPoints, key terms and definitions, so I always try to find a balance with this class. You guys are going to be taking exams at the end of your program. You might be taking the CRC, the NCC, or the NCE exam, or both. But either way, you're going to be tested on some of this stuff. And so I want to provide you with content and information that is going to be useful to you later on when you need to be studying for those exams. And so the key terms and definitions, Word documents that I have for each chapter, the PowerPoints that I have for each chapter, those are all reference from Corey, and so they're robust. They provide you with a good amount of information. I'm not testing you on these things, but I do encourage you to keep them, print them out potentially, because they will be beneficial for you to study later on, because those exams, regardless of which one you take them, they will be testing you to a certain degree on different theoretical orientations and the foundations of those orientations and yada, 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 all the boring stuff that goes into theories, right? What I want to do is focus on how we're using or how we see these theoretical approaches being used right now in 2020, right? And so psychoanalysis has been around forever. And if you're like me, if you're kind of picturing in your head what a psychoanalysis session looks like, you might be picturing kind of me. I picture a white male doctor a figure sitting in a chair, taking notes, smoking a pipe, because I'm pretty sure that's what pictures of Freud look like, and then somebody laying on a couch, and the therapist, doing those free association or dream analysis type techniques with their client, right? Or their patient, because the roots of psychoanalysis are in kind of the more medical model, if you're kind of looking at things from a broad lens, right? So yes, Freud kind of developed psychoanalysis as a way to get away from the medical model, but still there was a lot of medical model stuff that we saw in psychoanalysis, right? So historically, the therapist, the psychoanalyst who has received a ton of training and is very knowledgeable about the subject, is considered the expert. And so the patient, the client, there's no question that the therapist is the one that knows everything, that is directing the session to a certain degree. And, typically the therapist would not be sharing any details about themselves. They're kind of like, the voice behind the curtain in Oz. So, guiding that person, doing different hypothesis testing, different introspective analyses on the person, but not revealing or disclosing any information about themselves. Now, if you kind of fast forward, like we're almost looking at like 100 years here, right? In the history of psychoanalysis, but if you fast forward to 2020 and you'll notice this, I hope, within the session with Annie, it looks a lot different. If I didn't know that the session with Annie was a psychoanalytic focused session, I might not readily view it as that, because to me it just looks like a typical counseling session where the counselor is providing reflective statements. She is attentive, she's listening, she's guiding Annie to explore some of the feelings around, going back to school and then dropping out at the request of her husband, and what that looks like for her and what she actually wants her life to look like down the road, connecting it to her past, which, psychoanalysis, is not the only theoretic orientation that does look at the past, that tries to connect somebody's past and their history with the here and now. But we just see more of a focus on that in psychoanalytic theories than really any other of the theories to a degree. So, I encourage you, again, take a look at that, maybe take some notes on the actual session itself to see what a psychoanalysis session looks like today, what it looks like in more modern times. Although that was like in 2012, I think it was filmed, so a little bit old there, but still. So, in kind of postmodern psychoanalysis, we still see some recurring themes that are founded in, Freud's original development of psychoanalytic theory. So there's a lot of focus on the unconscious. There's a ton of focus on transference and countertransference. You see some of the techniques that we have always heard about when we think of Freud and psychoanalysis: the free association, the defense mechanisms, the id, ego, and superego. We know about the stages of development, and so those are all still present in psychoanalysis, but really focusing on connecting the unconscious self to the present self, making that connection. That's still a big part of psychoanalysis now. And transference and countertransference are two aspects of psychoanalysis that I think you can find and should be finding in every theoretical orientation. So transference being our client looks at us and sees something within us that elicits some type of feeling. So maybe we remind them of somebody in their life. And so they tend to be more reserved or less willing to get in depth with stories because we remind them of a very judgmental person in their life. So that's transference. Countertransference is the reverse of that. Whenever you as the counselor are looking at your client reminds you of somebody potentially, or is which happens, and it is something that you have to address. And I think that's the biggest takeaway from understanding broadly countertransference and transference within that therapeutic relationship, is that those are not things that need to be ignored or put to the side. They are things that you need to address head on. And for the counselor, when you're thinking about a counselor experiencing countertransference, supervision is where oftentimes we talk about countertransference. And so that supervision space allows you as the counselor to speak a little bit more freely about that client that you're seeing and what is it about that client that maybe rubs you the wrong way, or, how can you rectify your reactions? How can you manage how you're directing or assisting the client in reaching their goals in the appropriate way, rather than, it taking kind of a negative route, right? I think an example of this for me is if you are in the profession long enough, you tend to see clients that have very similar backstories, because you will probably end up seeing clients that have like a certain diagnosis or a specific underlying issue more frequently, right? We kind of tend to end up specializing in a certain area or another, right? So me being kind of on the more traditional rehab counseling side, I saw people that had back problems all the time. Men with back problems, so many men with back problems. And so for me, I would often have to manage countertransference because, you know, the guy that I was meeting with on Monday that was injured on the job and had degenerative disc disease and was on medication and had problems with workers' compensation, but still needed to get another job, reminded me a heck of a lot of the guy that I was going to see on Tuesday that had all the same issues and all the same problems, but was a totally different human being. Okay. And so, you know, you have to make sure that you are being fair and just, right? When you're serving your client population, and countertransference can really be a barrier in that process. So I got a little off track on that one. Where was I going at the end of the day? So psychoanalysis, American style is another. I wanted to go ahead and put an article up on this part of the content, the module content area, so you can see the difference again whenever we're looking at psychoanalysis as it was intended to be in Europe and a long time ago. It looks a lot different than what it does here in America right now. There are still things about psychoanalysis that again persist today. One is that people do get a lot of training, and so I put again a link to the American Psychoanalytic Association, which is not the APA, okay? But so there's a differentiation there. But so if you are interested in psychoanalysis, if you are interested in kind of pursuing this route post-graduation, you would need to go and seek additional training, more or less. And that, you know, to a degree, I think whatever theoretical orientation you start to gravitate towards, or if there's a mix of two or three, you want to be continuing to educate yourself. There are individual books that, like Carl Jung has his own book, Skinner's got books, DeShazer's got books. I mean, so you have all these theorists that have their own textbooks that offer more than just one singular chapter that Corey could offer in his text that you guys are reading this semester. So I do encourage you to go and purchase those books on like Amazon for cheap. But there are other schools of thought that require additional training. Psychoanalysis is one of them. Gestalt is one of them. DBT comes along with psychoanalysis. I mean, typically you're getting a good amount of training if you're going to be practicing dialectical behavioral therapy, which is a mix between CBT and psychoanalysis. So there are steps that you would need to take after graduation. Psychoanalysis still is typically a pretty lengthy process for clients. Traditionally, psychoanalysis didn't really have an endpoint necessarily, right? And so with that comes expense, there comes time and commitment on the part of the client, as well as the counselor to be able to do that. And so there's not, it could be that somebody is going to see their psychotherapist for years and years and years. Insurance companies in America don't like to pay for that. So, so psychoanalysis in the United States now, contemporary psychoanalysis does tend to be shorter than traditional psychoanalysis, but it's still relatively lengthy when you compare it to other treatment modalities that we see, like CBT and even motivational interviewing that's kind of time limited. You don't really want to compare time to like solution focused brief therapy. But I digress. So there is a time commitment. Now with that come the diversity issues and concerns, right? The things you have to take into consideration with psychoanalysis. Now, I like that the text does include multicultural considerations for each of the chapters. I think that's a really important concept to be addressing within each of these theoretical orientations, especially the ones that have been around for a good amount of time, that were more or less normed on middle class, upper class white individuals. So, there is space, and there has been movement in the psychoanalytic world to put more of a focus on diversity, on the impact of society and one's environment, on the view that those unconscious beliefs, right, that are present in psychoanalysis. So there has been some movement in that. I think there's still a lot of room for growth. It's not the main focus in psychoanalysis, but you will again notice that within the Annie session, the therapist does acknowledge culture and family, or family of origin, and how that played into how her feelings of, dropping out and not feeling a little bit worthless and doing that, how that all ties together and bringing it back into the here and now. There's still a lot of hypothesizing within psychoanalysis. So to a degree, the therapist is still kind of seen as that expert, right? But there's a little bit more of an egalitarian approach to the counseling relationship now than there was before. You'll notice in the video that the therapist has a lot of "I wonder" statements, right? So throwing things out there for the client. I wonder if. That's a way to kind of provide a hypothesis, test it out, see if it's working. And again, I think I'm losing my train of thought. So main things about modern day psychoanalysis. Yeah, so the additional training, it does take some extra time. It's not going to be for everybody. It's important if you're a psychoanalytic therapist that you're letting your client population know about the time commitment, know about any costs associated past what insurance might cover. All of that needs to go into those first couple of sessions that you have with your clients so that they're well informed and aware, because you do get, psychoanalysis is not the type of therapy where you would want to be leaving your client after the first couple of sessions, right? So they really do get into somebody's history, background, and how it all connects to what their presenting issues might be. And that does take some time to work through all of that. So I think I will leave it at that. Hopefully that provides you, along with the video and the additional resources, with a good idea of what psychoanalysis looks like today. It isn't, although I'm sure a therapist could have a couch and a client could lay on it, and you can analyze dreams, which is cool. But there are some key differences in the application of psychoanalysis now. And there were times in history where psychoanalysis really got a bad rap and people just kind of went away from it, as we saw the evolution of like more humanistic theoretical approaches, Carl Rogers, person-centered. You really saw people divert from the traditional personality-based theoretical approaches. So I'll leave you guys to watching the video, and I'll see you again in the Chapter 5 content area.